Welcome back, Daisy Cakes. This is my list of top 100 fantasy authors. Why am I doing this? Because I am Daisy Ex Machina, the drag queen detective who investigates all things speculative in science fiction, fantasy, and horror. I've curated a list of 100 fantasy authors, put them in alphabetical order, and divided them into groups of 10, and this is part 9. First in this group is Sir Philip Pullman, who was born in 1946 and is active today at the age of 78. And yes, you heard me right, Sir Philip. He was knighted in 2019 for his service to literature. He has been named one of the 50 greatest British writers since 1945 by Time magazine, and he was president of the Society of Authors, a position once held by Sir Alfred Lord Tennyson. So yeah, Pullman is kind of a big name. And what he's known for is a fantasy series called His Dark Materials, which starts with Northern Lights, published in 1995. In North America, it was published under the title The Golden Compass. These books have been criticized by Christians in general and the Catholic Church specifically because, as one critic noted, it is atheism for kids. Oh, did I mention it's a children's book? Talk about bearing the lead. I have a story about how I picked up a children's book in a second, but first, why the Catholic Church specifically? Well, the main villain in the Dark Materials is the Magisterium, which is the same name that the Catholic Church calls their authority to interpret the Word of God. In Dark Materials, the Magisterium looks an awful lot like the Catholic Church and maintains its tyrannical control through dogmatic religion. In this case, it's a religion concerning dust, which is this mysterious particle that is in the atmosphere. Everyone also has an animal familiar called a daemon, which is a not-so-subtle metaphor for the soul. The Magisterium is funding experiments to cut the bond between daemon and human for research on how to better control people. The main character is a young girl named Lyra, who investigates these experiments after his friend is kidnapped as a test subject. Now, if you say you don't read children's books, fair enough, but I still urge you to give this one a try because I think it transcends age category, and especially if you think you might be intrigued by books concerning the danger of dogmatic religions. Now, my story is that I picked up a copy of The Golden Compass way back in the 90s at a bookstore in the Castro, which is the San Francisco gay neighborhood. I had no idea it was a children's book because it was shelved in the adult section. And I have no idea why they did this. Maybe not enough kids visited the bookstore. Maybe they thought it would sell more in the adult section. Maybe someone couldn't tell the difference. But I had no idea it was a children's book, even while I was reading it. Oh, and this bookstore also stocked some of Garth Nix's young adult books in the adult section. Anyway, check out His Dark Materials. Melanie Rawn was born in 1954 and is active today. Here's another one of those fantasy authors that we don't know much about, but she's been around for a while. Ever since her debut novel, Dragon Prince, published in 1988, the first book in the Dragon Prince trilogy. Now, romantasy may sound like a shiny new subgenre, but trust me, it's been around forever, and you'll find that out if you read The Dragon Prince. It is about Prince Rohan, who is a pawn in a kingdom where dragons are very much real. He is supposed to marry one of the High Prince's daughters, but doing so means he might get assassinated. In fact, it's very likely he will be, so his aunt, who is Lady of the Goddess, helps him to secretly marry the beautiful Sioned, who possesses the magic power to manipulate light. They must keep the marriage a secret and try to fool the High Prince, who is still scheming to marry him off to one of his daughters. I liked this trilogy when it came out. I think it still holds up. If you like epic fantasy, politics, dragons, magic, all with a dash of romance thrown in, I think you'll love the Dragon Prince trilogy. Rick Riordan was born in 1964 and is very much active today. He is, of course, the mastermind behind the Percy Jackson universe that starts with Percy Jackson and the Lightning Thief, published in 2005. These books have become mega bestsellers and is already considered a children's classic. But did you know that was not his debut novel? In fact, his debut novel wasn't even a children's book. It was a mystery called The Big Red Tequila, published in 1997, about a private investigator named Trey Navarra, who leaves the San Francisco Bay Area to return to his hometown in Texas to solve his father's murder. It's the first book in a series about Trey Navarra's cases, which has won several awards. In fact, a later book in the series won the Edgar Award, which is the highest award given to mystery writers. So, why did he turn to children's books? Well, because he was a father and he was making up stories for his son about ancient Greek heroes. Percy Jackson is a modern 12-year-old boy who finds out his biological father is a Greek god, and he is whisked off to Camp Half-Blood, where demigods are trained and raised. When Zeus's lightning bolt is stolen, Percy and his friends are set on a quest to retrieve it. Oh, remember I said Riordan made this story for his son? Well, his son is dyslexic and has ADHD, and so does Percy Jackson. In the universe of ancient gods, Riordan has expanded it to other pantheons, and there are over 40 books with various different characters, like the popular Magnus Chase and the gods of Asgard. My favorite thing about Riordan is he has teamed up with Disney to form an imprint to publish books based on non-Western cultures by authors of those cultures. Patrick Rothfuss was born in 1973 and is hopefully still active today. He's suffering a bit from George R.R. Martinism in that his planned series has seemingly taken a long hiatus. By that, I mean the last book he published was in 2011, and we're still waiting for the sequel. So we're going to have to talk about this series, The King Killer Chronicle, because it starts with his debut, The Name of the Wind, published in 2007. This novel is what I would call literary. It has some of the most gorgeous language you'll ever come across in fantasy. The main character is Kvothe, and the story is a frame story where we meet an older Kvothe who runs a modest little inn. He is recognized by a scribe and agrees to tell his story. And we follow Kvothe's life from childhood, where he started as a child of performers of a traveling troupe, which turns dark and tragic and leads him on the road where he'll eventually be nicknamed the King Killer. The sequel, Wise Man's Fear, was published in 2011 and is just as good as the first book. This series has sold millions of copies and received much well-deserved critical acclaim. The series is supposed to conclude with a book under the working title The Doors of Stone, but like I said, it hasn't been finished. Rothfuss hasn't been idle. He's founded a publishing imprint called Underthing Press. He's co-written a comic series called Rick and Morty versus Dungeons & Dragons. Speaking of Dungeons & Dragons, he's a huge fan, and he's a player, and he was a guest on Critical Role. But, you know, even if he never completes the series, I still recommend The Name of the Wind. It's that well written. Okay, here's an author I just recently added to this list, another children's author, Katherine Rundell, who was born in 1987 and is very much active today. I have to give a shout out to one of my followers, Lynette. Hey, Lynette, who recommended this book to me. Impossible Creatures was finally published this year in North America, but it came out last year in other parts of the world. Now, this author wasn't on my radar, but Rundell has been publishing since her debut. The Girl Savage was published in 2011. Her second novel, Rooftoppers, was published in 2013 and won the Waterstones Children's Book Prize and the Blue Peter Book Award. Now, if you don't recognize those awards, then you probably aren't British, because I don't think she was very well known outside of Britain. That is not until Impossible Creatures, which is out right now, and at the time of filming is the #1 children's book on the New York Times bestseller list. It's a portal fantasy about a boy named Christopher who animals seem to be automatically attracted to and automatically follow him. And he finds out his family are guardians of this gate between our world and the world of magic. A girl named Mel comes through the gate with her baby Griffin and is followed by a killer. Christopher and Mel escape through the portal and find themselves on a quest to maybe save all of magic. This is very well written, whimsical, and surprisingly bittersweet. More than I would expect from a children's book. It is definitely a standalone, though because of its tremendous success, more books are planned, and I can't wait. Kristine Katherine Rusch was born in 1960 and is active today. She has been quite prolific in her career, writing over 100 books. She's also won a Hugo for her writing and also won a Hugo for her editing. She was the editor of the magazine of science fiction and fantasy for 6 years. She's also married to an even more prolific writer, Dean Wesley Smith, and they've collaborated together on several projects. She's also written many media tie-in books set in the world of Star Wars, X-Men, Star Trek, and on and on. She's another one I'm surprised hasn't become more well-known. But the series I recommend is the Fae series, which starts with The Sacrifice, published in 1995. It is about the Fae, these magical elvish creatures, but here the Fae are dark. Some may say grimdark and very powerful. In fact, they are intent on taking over the world, and they probably are destined to succeed. That is, until they try to conquer Blue Isle and find out that their destiny to take over the world may not go as smoothly as they had hoped. The story unfolds from many points of view. I personally thought the series was intense, but it is also very dark, maybe too dark for some people. I don't know. Check it out. If you are a fan of Dungeons & Dragons, then you know the name R.A. Salvatore, who was born in 1959 and is active today. Now, back in the 80s, you could send your novel directly to publishers into what is known as the slush pile. That's what Salvatore did with a novel he had written, and TSR, who at the time was publishing D&D books, that's when Margaret Weiss and Tracy Hickman became big names, and they picked up this novel from the slush that he sent, and they didn't like the novel, but they liked his writing. So he was contracted to write novels in a little D&D universe called Forgotten Realms. I know, if you aren't a Dungeons & Dragons super fan, you're shrugging your shoulders, but if you are a fan, I think you know what I'm talking about. His first novel was The Crystal Shard, published in 1988, which introduces Drizzt, the dark elf character who would become legendary in the Forgotten Realms universe. He's a dark elf or drow who is reformed, who turns to good and away from the evil nature of the dark elves who are governed by the evil spider goddess. Okay, I know it sounds silly, but the books are fun. And the books are small, but now you can get an entire story arc in one omnibus compilation like this one. This is a Legacy of the Drow collector's edition, which has the 4 books that compile Legacy of the Drow, a series that ran from 1992 to 1996 and hit the New York Times bestseller list. Salvatore has written over 50 Forgotten Realms books, mostly starring Drizzt. He's also written outside of Forgotten Realms, but he'll probably always be known as the creator of Drizzt. Maybe one of the biggest names in fantasy today is Brandon Sanderson, Sanderson was born in 1975 and made history with his Kickstarter campaign that raised over $40 million for 4 upcoming self-published fantasy novels. And yes, I got them too. Now, I like to say that I discovered Sanderson because I picked up his debut novel, Elantris, in 2005. I liked the cover, I liked the blurb, and most importantly, I liked the story at least enough that when his next book came out, I automatically picked it up, and that book was The Final Empire, published in 2006, the first book in the Mistborn trilogy. The premise was fascinating. What if the Dark Lord wins? That's what happened on the world of Scadrial, which for 1,000 years has turned into this dystopian nightmare, ruled over by the immortal Dark Lord when he took power. Now, Sanderson is known for his really detailed, logical magic system, and that starts here in Mistborn with allomancy, where magic users gain their power by ingesting metal, and each metal has a specific magic ability. Normally, a magic user can only use one metal, but the Mistborn can use them all. The main character is Vin, who is a street urchin who discovers she may be one of the legendary Mistborn. Could she also be the one who can defeat the 1,000-year rule of the Dark Lord? Now, Sanderson has gone on to publish many other novels, including finishing the Wheel of Time series after Robert Jordan passed away. He is super prolific, having also written middle grade, young adult, and recently even a picture book. His magnum opus is the Stormlight Archives, which is a massive and dense epic fantasy that's not complete. There are 4 books, 5 out later this year, and a planned 10-book series. It is probably, in my opinion, his best work. But whenever anyone asks me for a Sanderson recommendation, I always go back to the original Mistborn trilogy. I think it's the perfect introduction to Sanderson. Elizabeth Ann Scarborough was born in 1947 and is active today at the age of 77. She has published over 40 novels, including collaborating with Anne McCaffrey. Her debut novel was Song of Sorcery, published in 1982, which is the first in the Argonia series. She won the Nebula Award in 1989 with her science fiction novel, The Healer's War, about a nurse during the Vietnam War who finds a strange artifact. Scarborough, by the way, was also a nurse in Vietnam, so that book was pretty personal to her. My recommendation, though, is The Godmother, published in 1994, which is basically about a fairy godmother who answers the call of a social worker living in Seattle who needs help with her caseload. Now, I know how the premise sounds, very fun and whimsical, and it is, but it can also be pretty dark, since social workers deal with a lot of really dark things like child abuse, so look up trigger warnings if that's an issue. There's inspiration from several fairy tales, notably Hansel and Gretel. If you like magic, powerful older women, this book is just for you. We end this group of 10 with a very big name, V.E. Schwab, who also writes under the name Victoria Schwab. Schwab was born in 1987 and is, of course, active today. Her debut was a young adult novel called The Near Witch, published in 2011 by Disney. I personally really enjoyed her Shades of Magic series, which starts with the Darker Shades of Magic, published in 2015. It's about these parallel dimensions of London, defined by their color. So there's red London, gray London, white London, black London. I thought this one was a bit of a romantasy, but I think it's a terrific read. My recommendation is one of her later books, which I think really elevated Schwab's reputation as a writer, and that is The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue, published in 2020. I call this a modern-day dark fairy tale. Addie LaRue was born in the early 1700s in France and makes a Faustian deal with the devil, or at least some strange dark creature, to live forever, but there's a price. No one can ever remember her name or who she is. She has to go through eternity, never leaving a mark on the world. But what does it mean when she meets a man who does remember her? I don't know if you'd call this a romance, but there's this very interesting relationship that goes in unexpected ways. It's part historical fiction. There's a bit of magical realism. It's really good. In fact, I named it as my top book of 2020. That's the end of part 9 of this 10-part series of top 100 fantasy authors. Yes, that means there's just one more left. Let me know what you think of these authors down in the comments. And while you're there, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to my channel. Also, if you like science fiction, I'm simultaneously doing a list of top 100 science fiction authors. Until we meet again, may all the books you read be blessed.